I'm Grace, 32 female. I live in a quiet minimalist apartment in the heart of the city, a place that serves more as a charging station for my mind than a home. As a lead data scientist for a major tech firm, my days are spent translating chaotic streams of information into clean, predictable patterns. My life is structured, logical, and, for the most part, entirely under my control. It's a piece I fought hard to build, a fortress against the emotional chaos of the family I came from. For most of my life, my own family saw me as a jumbled mess of data they couldn't quite decipher, a daughter and a niece who didn't fit their pre-written code of what success should look like. They never imagined that my quiet work, the strange language of programming and algorithms I spoke, would one day allow me to rewrite our entire family dynamic with a single, simple action. This is the story of how I traded their years of condescending laughter for a moment of stunned, satisfying silence. Before this story unfolds, I'd love to connect with you. Please let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is in your corner of the world. It's amazing to see how far these stories can travel. Every family has its traditions. Some are warm, like decorating a tree together or a secret recipe passed down through generations. My family's tradition was a bit different. It was the annual, unspoken competition of triviality, held every Thanksgiving at my Aunt Susan's house. Her home was a shrine to beige, a place where any splash of color or unconventional thought was met with a polite, yet firm, sense of confusion. The air was thick with the smell of overcooked turkey and simmering resentments. The main event wasn't the meal, it was the catch-up, a ritualistic grilling session where everyone's life choices over the past year were laid out, judged, and ranked according to an invisible, yet universally understood, rubric. The criteria were simple, tangible, brag-worthy achievements. A new car, a promotion to a job with a title everyone could understand, an engagement ring, a baby announcement. These were the high-scoring plays. My life, with its abstract accomplishments in a field they didn't comprehend, consistently scored a 0. My father, Mark, was the self-appointed referee of this sad little game. A construction foreman, he was a man who understood the world in terms of things you could build with your hands: walls, decks, solid foundations. He respected sweat, calluses, and the satisfying thud of a hammer hitting a nail. My work, which took place in the silent, invisible realm of code and data, was flimsy and unreal to him. "What do you even do all day?" he'd ask, not out of curiosity, but as an accusation. "Just type." He'd make a little pecking motion with his fingers, his brow furrowed as if the very concept was exhausting. He wasn't a cruel man in the classic sense, he never missed a birthday, and he'd helped me move into every apartment I'd ever rented. But his approval was a currency I could never seem to earn. He measured worth in decibels and physical effort, and my quiet, cerebral existence was a constant disappointment. Then there was my cousin, Leo. He was a year older than me and had spent his entire life being the family's golden boy. He had the easy charm of a natural salesman, which was fitting, as he was an insurance broker. He sold policies, security, tangible promises printed on thick paper. He drove a company car, wore suits that were just a little too shiny, and always had a story about a big commission he'd just landed. He was the living embodiment of the family's values. His achievements were loud, simple, and easily digestible. He was the son my father wished he'd had, and neither of them was particularly subtle about it. Leo treated me with the kind of patronizing affection one reserves for a well-meaning but slightly dim-witted pet. He'd ruffle my hair, call me Gracie girl, and ask if my little computer job was going well, his voice dripping with condescension. My Aunt Susan, the host, acted as the scorekeeper. A part-time bank teller, she saw life as a series of deposits and withdrawals. Leo's promotion was a hefty deposit into the family's prestige account. My continued single status and hobby job were definite withdrawals. She wasn't overtly malicious, but she enforced the hierarchy with a relentless series of passive-aggressive questions and seating arrangements. Proximity to the head of the table was directly proportional to your perceived success. Leo and his latest girlfriend were always seated next to my uncle. I was usually placed near the far end, next to a distant, elderly relative who couldn't hear well. It was a subtle, annual reminder of my place. The only beacon of light in this beige-tinted nightmare was my Aunt Diane. She was my mom's younger sister, a graphic designer who had escaped our small hometown for the city years ago. She was divorced, child-free, and wonderfully, unapologetically herself. She wore bright colors, had a laugh that was a little too loud for Aunt Susan's house, and was the only one who ever asked me about my work with genuine interest. "Show me the latest project you're working on, G," she'd whisper, pulling out her phone while the others were dissecting Leo's sales figures. She saw the passion and complexity in what I did. She understood that building an algorithm could be just as challenging and rewarding as building a house. She was my silent ally, the one person whose opinion I truly valued. But she was just one voice against a chorus of dismissal. Year after year, I would brace myself for Thanksgiving. I'd drive the 2 hours back to my hometown, my stomach tightening with each mile. I would rehearse neutral, boring answers to their inevitable questions. My work was fine. My apartment was fine. My life was fine. I learned to be forgettable, to make myself as bland as Aunt Susan's mashed potatoes, hoping to fly under the radar. But it never worked. My quietness was interpreted as failure. My lack of things to brag about was seen as a lack of ambition. My father would look at me with a weary sigh, a look that said, "When are you going to get a real life?" Leo would smirk, secure in his position as the family's star player. The tradition was the same, year after year. I would arrive with a professionally made dessert that no one would comment on, endure hours of thinly veiled criticism, and drive home feeling small and insignificant, the echoes of their judgment ringing in my ears. I didn't yet realize that these annual humiliations were not just chipping away at my self-esteem. They were also forging a resolve deep within me, a quiet determination to one day change the rules of the game entirely. The year I turned 22 was different. It was the Thanksgiving that would become a line in the sand, the definitive before in the story of my life. I had just graduated from college with a degree in computer science and a minor in statistics. I was proud. I had worked relentlessly, taking on extra classes and a part-time job to graduate with honors and without any student loans. I just accepted my first real job, an entry-level data analyst position at a promising startup in the city. It wasn't glamorous, and the pay was modest to start, but it was a foothold in the industry I was passionate about. It was the first brick in the foundation of the life I wanted to build for myself. I arrived at Aunt Susan's house that year feeling a flicker of hope. This time, I thought, it would be different. I had a degree. I had a job. I had a tangible accomplishment. For the first time, I had something to put on the scoreboard. I walked in carrying a pumpkin cheesecake I'd spent the morning perfecting. The familiar wave of turkey and judgment washed over me. "Grace, you made it," Aunt Susan said, giving me a quick, bony hug before her eyes scanned my outfit. I was wearing a simple black dress, professional but understated. Her gaze lingered for a second too long, a silent critique of my lack of festive color. "Put the dessert on the counter, dear. Leo and his new girlfriend are here." "She's a paralegal," she announced, as if this were a breaking news headline. I saw him across the room, holding court by the fireplace. Leo was in his element, his voice booming as he told a story, his hands gesturing expansively. He caught my eye and gave me a lazy wink, a gesture that was supposed to be inclusive but felt more like a king acknowledging a court jester. My father was standing near him, laughing at Leo's story. He saw me and his face settled into its usual neutral, slightly disappointed expression. "Hey, kiddo," he said, walking over. "How's everything?" That was his go-to question, the verbal equivalent of a weary sigh. "It's great, Dad," I said, my voice brighter than I felt. "I actually got a job. I start in 2 weeks. I'm going to be a data analyst." I waited for the flicker of pride, the "Ata girl," the simple acknowledgement of my hard work. Instead, he just blinked. "Data what?" he asked. "So you'll be in one of those cubicles all day, staring at a screen?" Before I could explain, my uncle clapped him on the back. "Mark, Leo was just telling us he hit his quarterly bonus again, taking his new girl to the Bahamas next month." My dad's face lit up. "Now that's what I'm talking about." He boomed, turning his back on me to go congratulate Leo, my news dissolving into the background noise. The sting of that dismissal was sharp, but the main event was yet to come. It was time for dinner. As everyone started to move toward the dining room, Aunt Susan bustled around, directing traffic. "Okay, Mark, you're at the head of the table. Leo, you and Tiffany sit here." She went on, placing everyone in their usual spots. The main table filled up quickly. I stood awkwardly to the side, waiting for my assignment. Aunt Susan finally turned to me, a flustered look on her face. "Oh dear, we're a bit tight this year with Tiffany here. The main table is full." She looked around, her eyes landing on the small card table set up in the corner of the living room, a good 20 feet away from the main dining area. It was decorated with a paper tablecloth and was clearly intended for my two younger cousins, who were 7 and 9. "Grace, you're so good with the kids," she said, her voice syrupy sweet. "Would you be a doll and sit with them? You can make sure they eat their vegetables." The room seemed to tilt. I was 22 years old, a college graduate with a career path, and I was being asked to sit at the kids' table. I looked around, hoping for someone to intervene. Aunt Diane was out of town that year, visiting her partner's family, so my only ally was absent. I looked at my dad, hoping he'd say anything. "Dad," I said, my voice small. He looked from me to the table, then back to Aunt Susan. He let out a short, sharp laugh, a laugh that cut me to the bone. "Don't look so serious, Grace," he said, clapping his hands together. "It's just a seat. Besides, what are you going to talk about with us anyway? Your spreadsheets?" He said the word spreadsheets like it was something foul. "Go on, it'll be fun." My cousin Leo, overhearing the exchange, sauntered over with a smirk plastered on his face. He leaned in conspiratorially, his voice loud enough for everyone to hear. "Don't worry, Gracie girl," he whispered, patting my shoulder. "Think of it as training for your future. He'll probably just wash our cars one day, right?" He looked at my dad, who chuckled again, a deep, rumbling sound of agreement. The room didn't fall silent. A few people tittered awkwardly, but no one defended me. I was frozen, a hot wave of shame washing over me. I felt like I was shrinking, becoming the small, insignificant child they all clearly still saw me as. With my cheeks burning, I walked over to the small table and sat down on a chair that was far too low to the ground. I spent the rest of the dinner listening to the laughter and conversation from the adults' table, a distant universe I wasn't welcome in. I mechanically cut up my 7-year-old cousin's turkey and pushed peas around my plate, my own food tasting like ash. That was the moment something inside me broke. It was a clean, quiet snap. The hope I'd walked in with was gone, replaced by a cold, hard certainty. I would never be enough for them. And in that moment, sitting at a children's table with my father's laughter echoing in my ears, I decided I would stop trying. Instead, I would succeed on a scale they couldn't ignore. Not for their approval, but for my own vindication. The 2-hour drive home from Aunt Susan's that night was a blur of rain-streaked headlights and searing humiliation. I cried for the first 30 minutes, hot, angry tears that I hadn't allowed myself to shed in front of my family. I cried for the 22-year-old college graduate who was relegated to a card table, and for the little girl who had spent her entire life trying to earn a single, uncomplicated word of praise from her father. The sound of his laughter, intertwined with Leo's cruel joke, played on a loop in my head. "He'll probably just wash our cars one day." The words weren't just an insult, they were a verdict. They were a pronouncement of my worth in their world, and I had been found utterly lacking. By the time I crossed the city line, the tears had dried, and the fiery shame had cooled into something else. A cold, dense resolve that settled deep in my bones. The breaking point had passed, and now, in the wreckage, something new was beginning to build. I walked into my tiny, sterile apartment, and for the first time, it didn't feel like a temporary stopover. It felt like a cage. The off-white walls seemed to press in on me, mocking me with their blandness. This was the life they saw for me, small, contained, and forgettable. I sank onto my second-hand sofa and stared at the wall, the events of the evening replaying with painful clarity. It wasn't just about the kids' table. That was merely the final, symbolic act in a long play of dismissals. It was about the fundamental disconnect between their definition of success and my own. To them, success was loud. It was a new truck, a corner office with a view, a diamond ring. My success was quiet. It was the elegant simplicity of a perfectly written line of code, the thrill of discovering a hidden pattern in a mountain of data, the intellectual satisfaction of solving a complex problem. My world was invisible to them, so to them, it didn't exist. I finally understood. I could spend the rest of my life bringing them trophies, promotions, raises, awards, and they would never see them. They didn't speak the language. Presenting my career accomplishments to them was like showing a masterpiece to someone who was colorblind. They would only see shades of gray. The pain of that. Realization was immense, but it was also liberating. If I couldn't win their game, I didn't have to play anymore. I could create my own game with my own rules and my own scoreboard. And on my scoreboard, the ultimate prize wouldn't be their approval. It would be my own undeniable sovereign independence. It would be a life so successful, so solid, so tangible that even they would have no choice but to see it. They needed something they could touch, something they could measure. A big house. A nice car. Wealth that wasn't just a number in a bank account, but a physical presence. That night, sitting alone in my silent apartment, I let the anger and hurt fuel me. I got up, walked over to my small desk, and opened my laptop. I didn't look at social media or zone out on streaming services. I opened a fresh spreadsheet. The irony was not lost on me. My father had used the word spreadsheets as an insult, a symbol of my boring, incomprehensible life. Fine. I would use a spreadsheet to design my revenge. At the top, in bold letters, I typed, the 10-year plan. It wasn't just a career plan, it was a life plan. It was a roadmap to a future where no one could ever make me feel small again. I broke it down into sections: career, finance, and the endgame. Under career, I mapped out my trajectory. I wasn't just going to be a data analyst, I was going to be the best. I researched the skills I would need: machine learning, AI, advanced statistical modeling. I listed the certifications I would get, the programming languages I would master. I set a goal to be in a senior position in 5 years and a lead or management role within 10. I would work harder, learn faster, and be more innovative than anyone else. I would make myself indispensable. Under finance, I got even more granular. I created a budget so strict it would make a monk wince. I calculated how much I needed to save and invest each month. I researched high-yield savings accounts, index funds, and real estate investment trusts. I projected my salary growth based on my career goals and calculated my potential net worth at the 5, 8, and 10-year marks. I was determined to achieve complete financial freedom. And then, under the endgame, I wrote down the ultimate, tangible proof of my success. It started as a vague idea: buy a house. But as I sat there, the image sharpened. It wouldn't be just any house. It had to be a statement. It had to be in or near my hometown, a place I had always been so desperate to escape. The proximity was crucial. This couldn't be some abstract success in a faraway city. It had to be right there on their turf, a permanent, unignorable landmark of everything they said I would never be. I did a quick, almost fanciful search for real estate in the wealthiest suburb bordering my hometown, a place called Willow Creek. It was where doctors and lawyers lived, a world away from the modest tract homes my family inhabited. I scrolled through the listings, my heart starting to pound. And then I saw it. A beautiful, modern home with clean lines, huge windows, and a sprawling lawn nestled on a hill overlooking the town. The price was astronomical, a number so large it seemed like a typo. It was an impossible dream. But as I stared at the picture, the impossible dream became a target. I saved the listing, knowing it would be long gone by the time I could afford it. But it wasn't about that specific house. It was about what it represented. It became my North Star. I screenshotted the image and set it as my desktop background. It was the first thing I would see every morning and the last thing I would see every night. That spreadsheet wasn't a document of dreams, it was a declaration of war. A quiet, patient, meticulously planned war that I intended to win. The 10 years that followed that Thanksgiving were a study in quiet, relentless discipline. My life became a series of inputs and outputs, much like the systems I designed at work. The input was sacrifice and focus. The output was progress, measured in promotions, completed certifications, and the steadily climbing balance of my investment portfolio. While my peers were out late on weeknights, I was at home, mastering Python, or taking an online course in machine learning. While they were planning weekend trips, I was planning my next career move, networking with senior engineers and volunteering for the most challenging projects at work, the ones no one else wanted. The picture of the house on the hill, my digital North Star, was a constant reminder of my endgame. It kept me going when I was exhausted, when I felt isolated, when the temptation to just relax and live a normal life crept in. My family noticed the change, but they interpreted it through their own limited lens. My increasing absence from family events wasn't seen as a sign of my ambition, but as further proof of my strangeness. Grace is just so busy with her little computer things, I'd hear Aunt Susan tell a relati. V over the phone. My father stopped asking what I did all day, he just seemed to accept my life as a lost cause. She's a career girl, he'd say with a shrug, the words intended to be an explanation but sounding like a diagnosis. The less I saw them, the easier it became to focus. Each skipped family barbecue, each polite refusal to come home for a random weekend, was more time I could invest in my plan. I wasn't just avoiding their judgment. I was reclaiming my time and energy, redirecting it from defending my existence to building my future. My career trajectory followed the path I'd laid out in my spreadsheet with almost eerie precision. My first promotion from data analyst to data scientist came after 18 months. I had automated several key reporting processes, saving the company hundreds of man-hours. My bosses noticed. I took the salary bump, and instead of upgrading my lifestyle, I increased my automatic investment contributions. I continued to live in my small, cheap apartment. I drove a 10-year-old reliable sedan. I packed my lunch every day. I was living like a broke college student, but I was accumulating wealth at a pace that would have shocked my family had they known. Aunt Diane was the only one who had a clue. We'd have dinner once a month and I'd tell her everything. I showed her my code, explained the complex algorithms I was building, and celebrated my victories with her. She was my sounding board and my cheerleader. "You're building an empire, G," she told me once, her eyes shining with pride. "Don't you ever let them make you feel like what you do is small." She never judged my motivation, never told me to just let it go. She understood that my drive wasn't just about money or a house. It was about reclaiming my own narrative. She saw the steel in my spine and knew it had been forged in the fire of family dismissals. Around year 5, I made a significant leap. I was headhunted by a major tech conglomerate, the kind of company whose name everyone knew. They offered me a position as a senior data scientist with a salary that was almost double what I was making. The interview process was grueling, a series of technical challenges and high-pressure presentations. As I stood in front of a whiteboard, sketching out a complex neural network for a panel of stone-faced engineers, I thought of my father asking me if I just typed all day. The memory, which used to sting, now felt like a secret source of power. I aced the interviews and got the job. The new role was demanding. I was working on cutting-edge AI models, projects with budgets in the millions of dollars. The pressure was immense, but I thrived on it. I was leading a small team, mentoring junior analysts, and contributing to technology that would be used by millions of people. My work had a tangible impact, even if my family couldn't see it. The paychecks were staggering. I maxed out my 401k, opened a brokerage account, and started making more aggressive investments. The numbers in my spreadsheet were no longer projections, they were my reality. The impossible dream of the house in Willow Creek was starting to look less like a dream and more like an eventuality. During these years, Leo's life followed a predictable, family-approved script. He got married to the paralegal, Tiffany. They bought a starter home in a cookie-cutter subdivision. He got promoted to regional manager. They had 2 children. Every Thanksgiving, which I still attended out of a grim sense of duty, was a showcase of his achievements. There were photo albums of their trip to the Bahamas, discussions about which private preschool was best, and endless talk about the housing market. All the while, I would sit quietly, offering polite congratulations, a ghost at the feast. They saw my simple car in the driveway, knew I still lived in the same small apartment, and assumed my life was stagnant. They had no idea that my net worth had likely eclipsed Leo's several times over. My wealth was like my work, silent, invisible, and growing exponentially. It was my secret, the ultimate ace up my sleeve, and I was content to let them think I had a losing hand. The longer they underestimated me, the more powerful the eventual reveal would be. I was coding my escape, one line, one investment, one grueling workday at a time. The foundation of my new life was being built, not with hammers and nails, but with algorithms and sheer force of will. Year 9 of the 10-year plan was when everything began to accelerate. A project I had been leading for 2 years at my company, an innovative AI-driven logistics model, was launched to massive success. It streamlined the company's entire supply chain, saving them tens of millions of dollars in the first quarter alone. My name was attached to it, and my stock within the company skyrocketed. The executive board gave our team a substantial bonus, a life-altering amount of money that landed in my bank account like a thunderclap. When I updated my financial spreadsheet that night, the final number in the net worth column glowed on the screen. I had not only met my 10-year goal, I had surpassed it by a significant margin and a full year ahead of schedule. I stared at the screen for a long time, a wave of profound, quiet satisfaction washing over me. The tool of my revenge, which I had so meticulously sharpened for nearly a decade, was finally ready. The next day, I contacted a high-end real estate agent in the Willow Creek area, the very same suburb I had browsed all those years ago. I told her what I was looking for: modern, private, with a view. I also made one very specific, non-negotiable request. I wanted to conduct the entire process remotely and under the radar. I didn't want my name appearing on any public-facing documents until the final sale was complete. I didn't want any for sale signs with "sold" slapped across them, and I certainly didn't want any chance for local gossip to trickle back to my family before I was ready. The agent, a consummate professional used to dealing with discreet clients from the tech world, didn't bat an eye. For the next few weeks, she sent me virtual tour of incredible properties. It felt surreal, sitting in my tiny apartment while virtually walking through multi-million-dollar homes. I rejected several. They were beautiful, but they weren't it. They didn't have the symbolic weight I was looking for. Then, one Tuesday afternoon, an email landed in my inbox with the subject line, "A unique opportunity." I opened it, and my breath caught in my throat. It was the house. Not the exact one from the listing I had saved 10 years ago, but its spiritual successor. It was perched on the highest point in Willow Creek, a stunning piece of modern architecture with floor-to-ceiling glass walls that offered a panoramic view of the entire valley, including a distant, hazy view of the small town where I grew up. It was audacious, beautiful, and powerful. It was perfect. The asking price was at the very top of my budget, but I didn't hesitate. I had the agent submit a full-price, all-cash offer that afternoon, with a quick closing date and no contingencies. In a market where buyers were haggling and dealing with complex mortgages, a clean cash offer was the ultimate power move. They accepted within hours. The process that followed was a whirlwind of digital signatures, wire transfers, and encrypted emails. I never once set foot in the house. I bought my fortress based on data, blueprints, and a deep, gut-level feeling of certainty. 2 weeks later, an email from my lawyer confirmed it. The house was mine. The keys were being sent via insured courier. Holding that small, heavy package in my hands a few days later felt like holding a decade of my life. I sat at my small kitchen table and slowly opened it. Inside, nestled in foam, were 2 sleek, modern keys and a small garage door opener. I picked up one of the keys, its cold metal a stark contrast to the heat I felt in my chest. This was it. This was the tangible proof. This was the punctuation mark at the end of a very long sentence. For the next few months, I bided my time. The house remained empty. I hired a property management service to look after the grounds, but I told no one, not even Aunt Diane. I wanted this victory to be mine alone, first. The final piece of the plan was timing. It had to be Thanksgiving. The stage for my greatest humiliation had to be the stage for my ultimate vindication. As November approached, I found myself feeling strangely calm. The burning anger that had fueled me for so long had cooled into a placid, confident resolve. This was no longer a desperate act of a wounded girl seeking approval. It was the calculated, final move of a woman who knew her own worth, a worth that had nothing to do with her family's validation, but was about to be put on display for them anyway. Aunt Susan's annual Thanksgiving invitation arrived via group text message, full of smiley face emojis and reminders to RSVP. This year, my reply was simple: I'll be there, looking forward to it. This time, I wasn't bringing a cheesecake. I was bringing the keys to my kingdom. The days ticked by, and my anticipation grew, not with nervousness, but with the serene certainty of a programmer who has run thousands of simulations and knows, without a doubt, that the code is flawless. The program I had written for my life was about to execute, and there was nothing anyone could do to stop it. I drove into my hometown on Thanksgiving Day under a crisp, autumn blue sky. This time, the 2-hour drive didn't fill me with dread. It felt different, like a victory lap I was taking in my unassuming 10-year-old sedan. I was the same Grace on the outside, wearing a simple but elegant cashmere sweater and dark jeans. There was nothing about me that screamed millionaire. That was the point. The power was in the reveal, in the complete shattering of their preconce. I'ved notions. I pulled up to Aunt Susan's house and saw the familiar lineup of cars. My father's heavy-duty truck, my uncle's sedan, and Leo's shiny, mid-range luxury SUV parked proudly at the front of the driveway. I parked my own car at the very end of the street, as I always did, content to remain in the background for just a little while longer. I walked in, and the scene was exactly as I had pictured it 100 times. The scent of turkey, the low hum of the football game on TV, the family members clustered in their usual spots. Aunt Susan gave me the customary air kiss. My father gave me a nod from his armchair. Grace, you made it. Leo was, of course, the center of attention, regaling a small audience with a story about his recent golf trip. He was at his peak smarminess, radiating the smug satisfaction of a man who believes he is winning at life. He saw me and his story paused for a beat. Gracie girl, good to see you. Still driving that old thing, I see, he said, gesturing vaguely toward the street. You gotta let me know when you're ready for an upgrade. My guy can get you a good deal on a lease. A few people chuckled. I just smiled. It still gets me where I need to go, Leo. The pre-dinner ritual began. Everyone was catching up, which meant Leo was listing his accomplishments while everyone else nodded along. He and Tiffany had just put an offer on a bigger house in their subdivision. It's got a bonus room over the garage, he announced proudly. Gonna turn it into a man cave, my father beamed. That's my boy, always moving up in the world. He then turned his attention to me. The annual grilling was about to commence. So Grace, he said, his voice loud enough to draw the room's attention. What's new with you? Still staring at that computer screen all day? The room quieted slightly. Everyone was waiting for my usual non-committal answer. This was the moment. I had rehearsed it in my mind for years, but now that it was here, a profound sense of calm settled over me. I took a slow, deliberate sip of my water. Actually, Dad, I began, my voice even and clear, work's been pretty demanding. I've been spending most of my weekends house hunting. This got their attention. A flicker of surprise crossed Aunt Susan's face. Leo raised an eyebrow, a smirk playing on his lips. Oh yeah, he said, his tone dripping with condescension. Looking for a little condo downtown? You've got to be careful with those HOA fees, Gracie. They can be a real killer. My father chimed in. Don't get in over your head, kiddo. A mortgage is a serious thing. You should talk to Leo. He can help you figure out what you can actually afford. The phrase hung in the air, thick with implication, that I, of course, couldn't possibly afford anything substantial. I let the silence stretch for a moment, making sure I had everyone's undivided attention. I looked from my father's skeptical face to Leo's smug grin. Then, I reached into my pocket. My fingers closed around the cool, heavy metal of the keys. I pulled them out slowly. They weren't attached to a flashy keychain, just a simple steel ring. The design of the house key itself was modern and unique, unlike any standard house key they had ever seen. I held them up, letting them dangle from my finger. They made a soft, metallic jingle that seemed to echo in the suddenly quiet room. Thanks for the offer, Leo, I said, my voice steady, but I think I've got it covered. I actually just closed on a place a few weeks ago. Leo's smirk faltered. Oh, he said. Yeah, where at? That new development by the highway? He was trying to place me, to put my success back into a box he could understand. No, I said, keeping my eyes locked on his. It's a little more private. It's up in Willow Creek. You could have heard a pin drop. Willow Creek. The name landed in the room like a foreign object. It was a place they talked about, drove through on their way to somewhere else, but never a place they considered part of their world. Aunt Susan's mouth opened slightly. My father's brow furrowed in genuine confusion. Willow Creek, he repeated, as if he'd misheard me. That's expensive. Leo let out a short, incredulous laugh. He was recovering, trying to regain control of the narrative. Okay, very funny, Grace. What did you do, rent a room in someone's basement? And that was it. That was the final piece of condescension I needed. No, I said, my voice dropping just a little, carrying a weight of 10 years of silenced frustration. I bought the house on the hill, the one on Elderwood Lane. There was no mistaking which one I meant. It was a local landmark, the most prominent and modern home in the entire area, visible from miles away. It was there, one day, if I won the lottery, house. For a full 10 seconds, there was absolute, complete silence. It was a silence more profound and more satisfying than any shouting match could ever be. I watched as the color drained from Leo's face, his smugness collapsing like a deflated balloon. I saw my father's expression shift from confusion to disbelief, his mouth slightly agape as he processed the information. Aunt Susan just stared at the keys in my hand as if they were a magic wand. I could see the gears turning in their heads, the frantic recalculations as their entire perception of me was forcibly rewritten in an instant. The quiet, forgotten niece. The daughter who would never amount to anything. The cousin who would one day wash their cars. All of it erased. In its place was a woman who held the keys to a reality they couldn't even fathom. The silence was the sound of their world tilting on its axis, and it was the sweetest sound I had ever heard. The silence in Aunt Susan's living room finally broke, not with an apology, but with a wave of sputtering disbelief. You're joking, Leo said, his voice a strained whisper. It wasn't a question, it was a desperate plea for his version of reality to reassert itself. That's not possible. That house is worth millions. 3.7 to be exact, I replied calmly, dropping the keys onto the coffee table with a definitive clink. The sound seemed to break the spell. My father finally spoke, his voice hoarse. How? He asked, looking at me as if for the very first time. How in the world could you afford that, Grace? The question was laced with a decade of underestimation. He wasn't asking about my career or my investments. He was asking how someone like me, his quiet, unimpressive daughter, could have pulled off something so monumental. I had a plan, I said simply, looking directly at him. And I worked hard. My little computer job pays well, Dad. The use of his own dismissive phrase was deliberate, a small, final twist of the knife. I saw a flicker of something in his eyes. Was it shame? Regret? I couldn't be sure, and I found that I didn't particularly care. The need for his approval had vanished, replaced by the solid certainty of my own achievement. The rest of the afternoon was excruciatingly awkward. The air was thick with unspoken questions and resentment. Aunt Susan tried to rally, calling everyone to the dinner table, but the festive mood was shattered. The seating arrangement this year was a mess. They didn't know where to put me. Suddenly, the seat at the head of the table seemed to be open, but no one offered it, and I didn't want it. I sat down somewhere in the middle, a stranger among my own family. The conversation was stilted. Leo was completely silent, sullenly pushing food around his plate, refusing to look at me. His wife, Tiffany, kept shooting me nervous, curious glances. My father tried to ask a few clumsy questions about my work, but the vocabulary failed him. He couldn't grasp the scale of what I did, and now, that ignorance was no longer a source of amusement for him, but a source of confusion. The power dynamic had been irrevocably altered. I was no longer the family footnote. I was the headline, and they didn't know how to read the story. The only person who seemed genuinely happy for me was Aunt Diane, who hadn't been there for the big reveal but whom I had called on my way over. When I had told her the news, She had let out a whoop of joy so loud I had to pull the phone away from my ear. She arrived late, just as dinner was ending, breezing in with her usual vibrant energy. She took one look at the funereal atmosphere, then at my calm expression, and she knew. She walked straight over to me, wrapped me in a huge hug, and whispered in my ear, "You did it. You magnificent woman, you actually did it." Her genuine pride was worth more to me than all the shocked faces combined. I didn't stay for dessert. As soon as the meal was over, I stood up. "Well, I should get going," I said to the room at large. "I've got a lot of unpacking to do." It was my father who walked me to the door. We stood on the porch in the chilly November air, the silence stretching between us. "Grace," he started, then stopped, struggling for words. I guess I just never understood." "I know," I said. It was the truth. He hadn't understood, and he probably never would, not really. But it didn't matter anymore. "Your mother would have been proud," he said finally, his voice thick with emotion. It was the closest he could get to saying he was proud of me, and while a younger version of me might have cried at those words, the woman I was now simply nodded. "Yes," I said. "I think she would have been." I walked to my car, got in, and drove away from my Aunt Susan's house for the last time. I didn't look back. I drove through the familiar streets of my hometown, but instead of heading for the highway that led back to my city apartment, I took the winding road up to Willow Creek. I pulled into the long, private driveway of my new home. The house was dark and empty, but it felt more welcoming than the brightly lit house full of people I had just left. I used my key, and the heavy NT door swung open silently. I walked through the cavernous living room to the great wall of windows at the far end. The lights of the town were spread out below me like a blanket of scattered diamonds. It was a beautiful, peaceful view. From up here, everything looked so small. My phone buzzed. It was a text from my dad. "Maybe you can have us all over for Christmas?" I looked at the message for a long moment. I saw the future it represented. A new dynamic where they would come to my house, admire my success, and try to pretend the past had never happened. They would bask in the reflected glory of my achievements, the very achievements they had once mocked. And I realized with absolute clarity that I wanted no part of it. My house wasn't a new family clubhouse, it was my sanctuary. It was the fortress I had built to protect myself from them. Letting them in would defeat the entire purpose. I typed my reply, my fingers steady. "No, I don't think that's a good idea. I wish you all the best." I hit send, then I blocked his number. Then Leo's. Then Aunt Susan's. I left only Aunt Diane, a new view, a final goodbye. It was time to sever the ties that had bound me for so long. As I stood there, looking out at the world I had built for myself, I felt a profound sense of peace. The game was over. I had won. And now I was finally free.